Hello, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Moore's October Rants. Today's episode is going to be titled Disagreements. Disagreements are an unavoidable part of life. No matter how much we try to surround ourselves with like-minded people, no one goes through life without encountering differences in opinion. Whether they stem from personal preferences, values, or everyday decisions, disagreements are inevitable. Sometimes they're as minor as differing opinions on how to spend an afternoon. One person wants to hike, while the other prefers to relax and play video games. Other times, they revolve around much larger issues, such as politics, ethics, or belief systems. But the presence of disagreement itself isn't inherently negative. In fact, it can be quite the opposite. Disagreements can be a sign of engagement, independence, and critical thinking. They offer opportunities for growth, dialogue, and clarity, provided they're handled with maturity and respect. The ability to disagree without hostility is a skill, one that requires patience, emotional intelligence, and a willingness to listen. Expecting to agree with others all the time is unrealistic. Even the closest of relationships will experience conflict. No matter how much two people share in common, there will always be moments where their perspectives diverge. What matters far more than the disagreement itself is how it's approached. A calm, respectful conversation that explores differing perspectives can be productive, even enlightening. On the other hand, emotional outbursts, personal attacks, or dismissiveness tend to derail any meaningful exchange. Effective disagreement involves more than just stating an opposing view. It requires reasoning. If you're going to disagree, have something substantive to say. Offer facts, context, evidence, or a clear explanation. Reacting purely from emotion, without providing any logic or background, typically leads to unproductive conflict. At that point, it's not a disagreement, it's a refusal to engage. A disagreement without reasoning is just noise, a clash of stubbornness rather than a meaningful exchange of ideas. The problem arises when disagreements escalate into disrespect. A mature exchange can quickly devolve into name-calling or defensiveness if ego takes over. That's where the damage happens. It's not disagreement that strains relationships. It's how poorly people often handle it. The moment a discussion turns into an attack, the original point of the conversation is lost. Instead of seeking understanding, people become fixated on proving themselves right, often at the expense of the relationship itself. Approach is everything. If you're genuinely trying to understand where someone is coming from, if you're asking questions and staying calm, disagreements can be resolved surprisingly quickly. You don't have to agree with the other person, but seeing things from their perspective can help you reach common ground, or at least a respectful impasse. Sometimes the best outcome isn't convincing the other person to change their mind, but simply acknowledging that different perspectives exist. Sometimes the best outcome you can hope for is simply agreeing to disagree. Not every argument has to be won. Not every opinion needs to be changed. And frankly, trying to change someone's mind at all costs is often a waste of time and energy. Some people are deeply entrenched in their beliefs, and no amount of logic or evidence will sway them. Recognizing when a conversation has reached its limit is just as important as knowing when to engage in one. I've experienced this firsthand. I once had a roommate who noticed a large, unexpected charge on their bank statement after buying gas. They were understandably upset, so I returned to the gas station the next day and asked the attendant for an explanation. The clerk clarified that the charge was a temporary hold, a common practice at some pumps. I relayed this to my roommate, but they didn't believe me. They insisted the explanation was a lie. At that point, I realized there was nothing more I could do. I had the facts. I had the explanation. If someone refuses to believe a clear, factual answer, continuing to argue only adds stress. You can't force someone to accept the truth. People believe what they want to believe, and trying to override that is rarely productive. Some people would rather hold on to their frustration than accept a reasonable answer, and in those cases, arguing further only fuels their resistance. This idea extends far beyond personal experiences. Online discourse is a breeding ground for disagreements, and most of them are utterly pointless. People fight over everything: news stories, opinions, memes. Social media platforms like Facebook are full of people offering strong opinions, often without much evidence or thought behind them. The anonymity of the internet makes people bolder, more aggressive, and often less willing to listen. There's a group I follow called Trust No One. It regularly posts provocative questions like, "Who's the most evil person in the world right now?" And the responses are predictably divisive. People name political figures, celebrities, even historical icons. I frequently disagree with many of the responses, but I don't waste time fighting strangers in the comments section. It's not worth the energy. I could argue with them. I could insult them. I could tell them they have no idea what they're talking about. But what's the point? They believe what they believe, and no amount of online bickering is going to change that. The internet is full of people who are more interested in winning arguments than in learning anything new. That's another thing disagreements have taught me. Not every conversation needs to be won. Not every point needs to be made. If someone presents a flawed argument and refuses to hear reason, let it go. That's not weakness. It's wisdom. Knowing when to disengage is just as important as knowing when to speak up. Sometimes people will throw all the evidence in the world at you, and you'll still disagree. And that's okay. Opinion, principle, and belief don't always bow to facts. People aren't robots. We're emotional, intuitive, biased, and even when we try not to be, that still shapes how we see the world. I've had close friendships where we disagreed on big issues: politics, religion, morality, but we respected each other enough to keep the conversation civil. Sometimes, we even learned from one another. But when someone lets a disagreement end a relationship, it says more about their rigidity than about the content of the debate. I remember one particular case. I met someone online, and we developed a connection. We'd talk for hours, laugh, share stories. Eventually, we moved to Instagram, video chatted, and grew close quickly. She lived in the UK, I'm from the US, and we had different views, especially about issues like abortion. She was firmly pro-choice. I lean more pro-life, though I believe context matters. We had civil conversations about it. We disagreed, but we still talked. We laughed, we opened up, we shared personal stories. But eventually, she told me she didn't want to continue the friendship. Her reason? We have nothing in common. That was frustrating because it wasn't true. We had a lot in common, but the disagreement outweighed everything else in her eyes. That experience reinforced something I've come to accept. For some people, disagreement is a deal breaker. For me, it's not. I don't believe differing opinions automatically negate common ground or compatibility. But others feel differently, and that's their choice to make. In the end, it all comes down to perspective. How we interpret disagreement shapes how we respond to it. Some people see disagreement as a threat. Others see it as a chance to sharpen their thinking. Personally, I try to view it as a neutral event. It's neither good nor bad until we decide how to handle it. I've also had to learn not to take disagreement personally. I used to get angry, defensive, even raise my voice when someone challenged me. I'd fumble my words and get overwhelmed. But eventually, I realized disagreement isn't an attack. It's not about me, it's about ideas. Just because someone challenges your opinion doesn't make them your enemy. That's a mindset more people need to adopt. We're too quick to treat differing views as personal betrayals. But disagreement doesn't mean disrespect. It just means we think differently. If anything, disagreement helps define your values. It shows you where you stand. It clarifies your boundaries. And when approached with the right mindset, it can lead to stronger, more honest relationships. At the end of the day, disagreement is inevitable. But how we handle it? That's where character shows up. Anyways, thank you for listening to this episode of the Moore's October Rants. Signing out. Have a good one, guys. Goodbye for now.